Low and throttle up.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Welcome to Fort Worth Esoteric Masonic Podcast, where we wade into the deep end of the pool for the more spiritually minded Mason.
Nice to be in orbit.
The statements of our guest and host do not represent the stance of any lodge or Grand Lodge.
Welcome back, brethren, to the Fort Worth 148 podcast. My name is Billy Hamilton. I'm a past master of Fort Worth 148. Tonight, I'll be going solo, actually. And I do want to introduce our special guest, though. And if you would please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Brother Billy. My name is Greg Kaminsky. Thank you for having me on your excellent podcast. I actually have my own podcast called A Cult of Personality. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a membership website, chamberofreflection.com. It features a lot of interviews and lectures, presentations on a variety of topics that fall within the Western esoteric tradition label. I guess you could say that includes Freemasonry, of course. And I've written a couple of books, Celestial Intelligences, about Giovanni Pico del Mirandola, Renaissance philosopher, and his angelology, and another book called Praneus, which is reflections on the preliminary practices of Buddhist Tantra from a Western perspective. So again, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's our honor to have you as a guest. Brother Greg, if you don't mind, let's start this off, and if you would tell us a little bit about yourself outside the Masonic or esoteric lens. Tell us, who is Greg Kaminsky?
Well, let's see. I'm someone who's been interested in the arcane, symbolic, esoteric aspects of world religions, and just basically been kind of fascinated with that my entire life. So at some point, eventually I got a degree in medieval studies at Harvard and joined Freemasonry, joined other esoteric fraternities and orders along the way. And at this point, I'm married, I have children, I live in Michigan, and I practice Vajrayana Buddhism as my spiritual path. And yet I find my teacher, because he is a Western teacher, is also able to point out and instruct me in various ways, and that compare and contrast with Western traditions, which would include, Jewish Kabbalah, esoteric Christianity, Islamic Sufism, as well as things like Gurdjieff work. So it's a wide range of things to draw upon to further my education, if you will.
So thinking back about it, actually, yoga, actually, I've studied a little bit about like the origins of the Golden Dawn, and of course you come across the Lima and all that, and in the writings of Aleister Crowley, it's kind of hard to get away from him, right? He's about one of the most readily available authors. So, but one thing that interests me about that is that the yogic practices are infused throughout all of them, right? So it's it seems like there has been, at least for, I would say, 130, 140 years, kind of this attempt to bridge the Eastern mysticism and Eastern yogic practices with Western mysticism as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raise, and it's something I get into at length in my book Pronaeus, because in many ways, the Western traditions that you're talking about, like the Golden Dawn or Thelema, other sort of Western magical currents, they clearly recognize the importance of working with the various centers of the human being, right? Like the intellectual, the physical or mechanical, the emotional. But I think one of the things that I've learned along the way is that these Western traditions are kind of fragmentary. They're not whole or complete.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because ostensibly the idea with these schools, if you will, is gnosis, to produce beings who have acquired gnosis. And yet I don't actually see that as the result of it. And the reason, I think, is because it's not there from the beginning. And if it's not there from the beginning, you can't create something from nothing. If you don't have the plant, how are you going to get the seeds to then grow another plant? Mm-hmm. It's very similar to that. It's very organic in that way. And so I feel like on some level that, yes, these groups, do provide value, obviously, and they're important, but they don't do the same types of things that like an authentic school and say, like I mentioned, Jewish Kabbalah or Islamic Sufism or esoteric Christianity or esoteric Hinduism or esoteric Buddhism, that's kind of aiming for the ultimate spiritual realization as the result of the practice of the path, if you will. So I don't know how relevant that is to your question, but I felt like that was important to express.
Right. No. And I mean, it is a valid point too, that, all of the, I guess, more established Western traditions, even going back to Theosophy and, in the Golden Dawn and the others, it seems like they're attempting to be very syncretic, right? In that they'll grab kind of pieces from here and there and try to merge them into a singular whole. But they're very disparate, right, in their approaches. Like if you read some of the original Golden Dawn material from, the flying rolls that they came out with, in one, they'll talk about, the breathing exercises, and, then they'll talk about, the Kabbalah, and then they'll skip to Tatwas. And, it's like, it's, I can see how it's very, and not to negate any of it, because I love all of it, but sometimes it does come off as a little piecemeal.
Yeah, and that's okay, as long as we all understand, what is going on.
Right.
Yeah, because the sort of contrasting example to that would be like, a school of like esoteric Buddhism, where you have a spiritual master who's gone from the beginning to all the way to the end of the path and knows every facet and every stage and every step and every practice and every method. And so they can then teach those and instruct their students in the various methods and apply different methods for different people, because people are different. And it's not like, putting together a car. Human beings are an organic living process. And so really the main ingredient you need is the master, the spiritual master, who has the wisdom to know, exactly how to work with each student and how to best, get them to fully, live up to their potential, I think.
All right. Well, so I know we kind of started off, jumping right into it. If you don't mind, let me pull back a little bit. And you had mentioned that you were a Mason. Would you mind telling me, when you joined and how old you were?
Yeah. Let's see. I joined I first became entered apprentice in 2009, I believe, and then was raised in 2010 or 11. I forget. I think it might have been 2011. And I joined St. John's Lodge in Boston, and it was just beautiful experience, and I just loved it tremendously, and I learned quite a lot. I had met a few members of the lodge outside of Masonry and was friends with them, and they sort of always talked about Masonry around me. Not anything, that I shouldn't have heard about ritual or anything like that, but just sort of how interested they were in Masonry, the sort of the lore surrounding Freemasonry and that sort of thing. And they always were trying to, I think, entice me a little bit without, directly asking me, of course.
Right.
And so eventually I was pretty dense, but eventually I got the hint and asked to join. And it was great. And it was a long process to, petition and investigation and all of that, but it was really worth it, I'd have to say.
Okay. Well, and that's kind of the trick of Freemasonry, right? In that you can't ask someone to become a Mason, but you can leave cookie crumbs, leading up to the door, and then, hope that they knock and ask to be let in.
Yeah, for sure. It's and I've learned from them, how to do that. And I always try to do the same thing for other men that I feel would benefit from Freemasonry.
All right. Well, and actually that's interesting, because like I have a couple of notes here. It's like when did you join? How old were you? What inspired you to join? And what lodge did you join? And you kind of answered all of them with your answers. So
I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I'm getting up there. So I think I was in my 40s.
Okay. All right. So what do you do? What is your professional background, if you don't mind me asking?
Professional background. I don't know that I have like an actual professional background, because that sounds really serious. I do this podcast. I write some books. I give some talks. I chat with people about, spiritual path. I do some practice. I go to teachings from my teacher, and, that's pretty much my life. So okay. I don't know if you would call that a professional background.
No, I mean, that works. It's so professional writer and or lecturer.
Yeah, I'd say like podcaster, author, speaker. How about that?
Okay, that works for me. So I do want to touch upon your books, and I do want to lead first with celestial intelligences, right? Um, so, if you don't mind me asking, what inspired you to write this book?
Okay, so this book, Celestial Intelligences, it's a book for people who don't know. It's a book about the Renaissance philosopher Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who was a genius, and at a very young age, he challenged the church and civil authorities by proclaiming things like the only way to know the truth of the Christian faith is through the Kabbalah, or that natural magic is another way to know that Christianity is true. And he had proposed doing this like huge debate in the Vatican in front of the church fathers and the Pope. And this is in like the late 1400s. Mm-hmm. And it did not go well for him. He got excommunicated. They banned his book. They found like 13 of his 900 theses that he had come up with that to be heretical. So they burned as many copies of the book as they could found, and, threatened whoever was caught with the book would be excommunicated and punished. And Pico fled Rome and got captured. And basically, Lorenzo de' Medici saved him and basically said to the Pope that if you let me take care of Pico, he's not going to be any more trouble to you. And the Pope agreed. And so Pico then kind of moderated his tone somewhat, but that's really not the end of his story at all. But anyway, that's sort of the broad overview of Pico. And he wrote something about some angels and angelology that I found really interesting. And this book originally started as my master's thesis at Harvard for my medieval studies degree. And originally I really wanted to write more about the origins of the Western esoteric tradition and the connection with Jewish Kabbalah and how that merger occurred. Mm-hmm. But my advisor convinced me completely that was a terrible idea for a thesis. And she convinced me that I had to narrow my focus really, really tightly. And she said, the only way I'll agree to work with you on this is if you write about angels. And I said, I can agree to that.
Okay.
Because I like angels a lot, and she likes angels a lot. And so that worked out. And then she said, well, what about this guy Pico? She's like, he seems interesting. What about him? And I was like, well, he wrote about angels. That would work. And we were kind of off to the races after that. And so, so the book started off as my master's thesis, and then kind of sat with it for a couple of years and massaged it a little bit. And then Anathema Publishing decided to release it. And Joseph Uccello did the artwork and the book design. And he just did a phenomenal job with all of the artwork, the covers, everything. It's just gorgeous. So I'm really happy with the book, and I'm happy with Joseph's work and Anathema, and it's just tremendous.
Yeah. No, it is a beautiful book. I actually have one of the limited edition versions.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, those are really nice.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. And so to go back to, you were mentioning that, Pico della Mirandola, he wrote these 900 theses when he was only 23, right, in 1486. This is a time when, the Jews are being expelled from Spain, in other countries. So it's interesting to see him try to marry Jewish mysticism with Christianity to develop kind of a Christianized version of the Kabbalah.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think the whole thing is completely fascinating, and how unlikely, right? I mean, it seems crazy.
Mhm.
Like you have this Italian aristocrat, and he's teaming up with some expelled, converted, Kabbalists from Spain who are teaching him Kabbalah, but from a convert's perspective, right?
Mhm.
So they're showing him how Kabbalah verifies aspects of the Christian faith and Christ himself. And so, of course, Pico's intrigued, and he's a genius. So he picks up Hebrew, he learns Hebrew, he can read it, write it, speak it. He learns, Kabbalistic books. There's it seems somewhat implied that he was exposed to a number of really rare Kabbalistic texts, including the works of Joseph Gikatia and some other crazy Ilanot, they call them. They're these long scrolls. Some of them are in the Vatican archive that are created by Kabbalists as a practice document. So it'd be like a memory aid for a practice, and it would be filled with, Hebrew and the diagrams and trees of life and whatnot. And so Pico was exposed to all of this, and he very quickly came to understand the value of the whole Kabbalistic system, its approach, its view, and kind of this humble, pious seriousness that they approached their practice with. And and I think he sensed how everything became holy as a result.
Mm.
And he even wrote this apologia as sort of subsequent to this 900 Theses. And it was later sort of edited and abridged into what we know now as the Oration on the Dignity of Man, which became the declaration of Renaissance humanism. But if you really, really examine that document, it is not a declaration of humanism in saying that humans are the ultimate. He's saying humans are the ultimate because they can, where they place their attention, can literally determine what they become.
Mm.
That's why he was saying humans are great, not because humans are humans and humans, dominate the cosmos or rule the world. It was more humans have the capacity to unite with the divine. That's what makes us special. And to go even higher than the angels. The angels can't actually do that, in a sense. So that he's saying that we can do something they can't, although we need their help and it takes a tremendous amount of work. His system was ultimately about the emulation of angels. So looking at different angelic orders and then emulating their activity as a way to become more holy, really. And so if he would say, you begin with the cherubim, and the cherubim are intelligence. And so by emulating the cherubim, you have to learn philosophy. So then you would know thyself, and then you would be able to know what the world is. And then he said, then you can emulate the seraphim, who are all about devotion to God. And then you would learn what the divine is. And you can't really love the divine until you know what it is. And so that is sort of that activity. And then he said, you can then emulate the angelic order of the thrones, which means you would be able to act rightly in the world. Because if you know what you are, and you know what the world is, and you know what God is, then you have no trouble acting correctly, having right action in the world. And so that was really his sort of overview of his prescription of how this angelic emulation could transform a person.
So, in speaking of the different orders of angels in his writing about emulating them to come closer to God, right? What I found interesting in your book was that there are a lot of mentions of how it seems like he viewed the tree of life of the Kabbalah with Jacob's ladder, right? In that the angels were, each, I guess, order of angels occupied one of the rungs on that ladder.
Yes, it's exactly correct. That the tree of life as a diagram for spiritual ascent and Jacob's ladder from the Bible, they're not two different things. So you're exactly correct. And so that each order of angels would occupy one of the sephirot, one of the spheres on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have 10 orders of angels. And really what Pico did is he kind of, when he wrote about these angels in his 900 Theses, he kind of rearranged them. So normally the seraphim are the top order of angel, but Pico made the cherubim the top because he said they're like intelligence and you have to emulate them first. And he said that's the key, right? Because in his mind as a philosopher, of course, he said, if you don't have the intelligence, if you don't know thyself, this sort of very classic, charge, if you will, of the mysteries, one must know thyself, and all that entails is really the first step, right? That's one of the first of the Orphic of what is it? I forget, but they have it. It's these three, which is like know thyself, and then everything in moderation.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third is thou art. And so know thyself is really the first stage. And so that's why he made the cherubim the top order of angels. And really that was kind of my main argument in the book, I think, among others, but that's kind of the central one.
Mm-hmm. So, and as I was reading it, I was wondering, because looking at the typical arrangement of the order of angels, I'm like, so, why does he suggest emulating the cherubim, right? Why didn't he go straight to the seraphim? But as you said, being a philosopher and an extremely intelligent person himself, I could see why intelligence would be like the prime, I guess, the prime condition that one must emulate in order to proceed to the others.
Yeah, it's the faculty that one must develop in order to proceed through the whole process in his mind. And I think, in addition to know thyself relating to the cherubim, because this whole connection really with self-knowledge, right? Because you can't start with knowing the divine if you don't know what you are, right? You have to know what you are. We have to start where we are or really on any path, but certainly on the spiritual path. You have to start where you are. You can't start at some lofty place where you would like to be or think you deserve to be, because that actually doesn't work. So he's correct in asserting that you have to start with the emulation of the cherubim, because if you relate that to knowing thyself, we have to start with us. We have to start with who we are. And that relates very directly with the spiritual path, because on the spiritual path, starting with yourself, you have to actually start with understanding like how we are mechanical and how we think we're conscious, but we're often not really conscious. We're kind of sleepwalking, or occupying habit patterns without thinking or being really aware of it, that we lie to ourselves about ourselves almost regularly, and we can't help it. And so it's a lot of like working with that to kind of see all the ways that we're just like everybody else. And then, because if you can't see it, you can't actually change it. And so that's really the first step, is sort of becoming aware of all of these aspects of who and what we are. And then only from there can you proceed to, well, what are we actually, if we are fully aware and fully embodied, then what then? Well, that's a totally different story at that point, but we're not there yet.
So in researching for this book, was there anything that you came across that changed your personal outlook on esotericism?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I came to understand in researching and writing this was, for the longest time, I thought that if I could just find or learn the correct secret information, the secret knowledge, the secret keys, that would have the capacity to change who and what I was. But I came to understand that that is not true. There is no information or knowledge that's capable of transforming anyone. Because information does not equal transformation. And I came to understand that there's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. And it's the difference is as great as the difference between the earth and the sky. It's that huge. Mm-hmm. Because knowledge is basically breaking down everything into ever smaller, more discrete bits of knowledge or data or of information packets that we can then acquire and try to sift through and collate and put together like some bizarre jigsaw puzzle. But that won't give you a picture of reality as a whole. Because in order to do that, you have to sort of unlearn and unknow. And that's the only way to put all this back together in our minds, is to like get rid of all of our ideas and concepts and the things that we think we know, because they're often wrong, because they're unexamined and not considered. And so it's really the wisdom comes from being able to perceive reality as a single wholeness and not as ever greater collection of ever smaller bits of information. I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, that was a huge leap, because it meant that there was no way that I could actually change on my own. I needed like a teacher, a school, like people who actually knew what they were doing and not just like fumbling in the dark like I was, because that doesn't get it done. Mm-hmm. And so that for me, that was like a massive leap. And I'm very grateful that I was able to learn that.
Well, and that's an interesting thought about how, going back to, there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, because I think a lot of us who step foot on the esoteric path, right, you do feel like there is a mystical key. There's something that will unlock all the secrets of the universe I've been looking for if I could just find it. but it seems like the more you get into it, the more you realize that it's an internal transformation that may be spurred on by, by external learning or wisdom, the influence of I guess a master, if you would, that can help change your way of thinking. But in the end, it's something that, in a way, it has to be internal.
It requires work. And the work it requires is your attention. And it requires your intention through the discipline of spiritual methods.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what works. That's all that works. I mean, sure, there may be certain gifted individuals that seem graced to, just have that, upon them, but there's very probable that they've worked towards that in some way or another, whether it was in this life or some prior, that, it requires work. That's the best I can tell. Like it does not come easily. Mm-hmm. It's hard won. I mean, and to be clear, wisdom, the way I would define it it's not experience. It's not knowledge. The best description I could say is wisdom is like the light of the divine that shines down upon us and blesses us with, the spiritual path, the spiritual masters, the spiritual methods, and allows us the possibility to transform ourselves into something greater. But wisdom is not knowledge, and it's not experience, and for the most part, human beings don't possess any wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but that's the way I define it. That's the way I see it.
Okay. Well, kind of like the Sophia, or the, I'm trying to think of the Gnostic influence that descended through. I'm losing the thought there.
Yeah, I mean, I that sounds familiar for sure.
So Mirandola, it's interesting when you do a little bit of research about him, you see that he seems to have had a huge influence not only on Western esotericism but also Western philosophy. Because his Oration on the Dignity of Man was widely distributed and read and considered maybe even a starting point of humanism, right? Especially as the Western concept of it. What are your thoughts on his influence, in the ensuing 500 and almost 50 years at this point?
Oh, I think his influence is tremendous and often unappreciated. If it weren't for Pico, I don't know that we would have any knowledge or understanding of Kabbalah at all, whatsoever. I mean, unless you're, Jewish and, run in those circles, because he basically single-handedly elevated it in the public consciousness in such a way that his students, if you will, like Johann Reuchlin, took it to Germany, or Paracelsus picked it up, or Christian Nor von Rosenroth published the Kabbalah Unveiled in 2 volumes, extensive, sections from Zohar and diagrams of trees of life, and it's just extensive stuff. So the entire introduction of Kabbalah into Western esotericism as a monotheistic living esoteric tradition was made possible by Pico, almost single-handedly. Now, he paid the price for that, certainly, but he was willing. He was more than willing to. So, I mean, his influence in terms of Western esotericism is just massive. And, people may not use Kabbalah the way that Pico had envisioned it, but irregardless, it's still present, because he's the one who took the initial steps to make that happen.
Mhm.
And yeah, you're right. And from just a general Western philosophical tradition, yeah, his writing kind of kicked off Renaissance humanism. I mean, I have misgivings about that for sure, because I honestly don't believe that Pico intended that or would have wanted to even participate in that sort of perspective. He was more of like what you would call a perennialist or a traditionalist,
Mhm.
right? He was not a modernist. He was not someone who thought of humans as innately, divine. It required work. It required purification. It required education. It required contemplation. But it did not require the intermediation of a priest. So, it put him at odds in many ways with a whole variety of people and different ways of seeing the world. But he was very much willing to go against the grain. He was always willing to question, and he was willing to basically pursue truth regardless of the cost. And so despite the fact that he, at times some of his philosophical writings may seem unhinged or, maybe a little too youthful, exuberant, I don't know.
Mhm.
But I think his courage, his, almost foolish courage, is I'm not saying we should emulate the way he was, but there's something to be admired in not being fearful about pursuing the truth and proclaiming it. But, people have different capacities for danger.
Mhm.
So we all have to consider our circumstances.
Right. Well, and like you said, he may have ultimately paid the price. I mean, there's theories that he was poisoned when he died at the age of 31.
Yeah, there's strong evidence, I think, that he was assassinated. And so, and he was, he lived in Florence, Italy in the Renaissance. Like people getting poisoned was not like uncommon at all. So, and he played in that arena.
Right.
He willingly stepped into that arena. So,
Well, and his death came actually after he seemed to have made amends with the church, because he was pardoned by Pope Alexander VI the year before he died.
yes, but he was in a sort of ongoing, I don't know what you'd call it exactly, with Savonarola, the Dominican friar, famous
Okay.
from the bonfire of the vanities. And Savonarola wanted Pico to join the Dominican order. And Pico apparently told Savonarola that he would, but he never actually did. So when they buried Pico, they dressed him in the habit of the Dominican order.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wow is right. Yeah. It's pretty messed up. But, this is Renaissance Florence, so it's pretty messed up.
Right. The other book he wrote about the yogic practices.
Yeah, Pronaos. It's
Proneus. I should have remembered that too, right? Like
That's okay.
like Chronos, but
Pronaos, I don't know, pronounce. It's like the porch on at the entrance to like the Greek temple. Right. So that's like the what I'm writing about in the book. These preliminary practices are kind of like the entrance way to Tantra. So
okay.
that's the reason it's called Pronaos.
Well, and the beast, I guess, to add a little bit of explanation too, because I know a lot of people, when they think Tantra, they immediately think, like sex yoga, but it is a full school of yoga on its own that, I think over the years, people have focused on that, but it's definitely, there's a lot more to it.
Oh my God. Yeah. That it's definitely like any thoughts of like, any kind of like softcore porn or something like of that nature should definitely be discarded, because it is not that at all. I mean, there are sexual practices, but those are like so advanced that it's almost no one actually does them. And when they do, it's not in a lurid or prurient sort of thing that's happening there, because it's a spiritual path. I mean, you're going through like, all of the things that you would imagine a spiritual path includes. It includes all of them, like discipline, purification, renunciation, compassion, all of these things, because it encompasses the entirety of the Buddhist path, beginning with Sutra through Mahayana and then into Vajrayana. And basically the main difference between these forms, Sutra, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, is really the view of reality that, that one holds as part of the practice. And that's really the main part. And I write about this in the book, and it's, basically the idea is that all is divinity, and we are simply just like, nodes of perception. But the idea that, our identity is somehow solid or real in any concrete way or independently existent way is not true. And there's many reasons for that, but this is sort of like the basic kind of overview of like a view of reality. And it's a resultant path, which means that the view that one aspires to hold is the same view that one realizes if and when one accomplishes the path. But in the book, it really talks about the preliminaries, and it's really talking about them truly from a Western perspective. And I use quotes and examples from Western philosophical and esoteric traditions pretty much exclusively to try to explain it, because it can be understood in English with examples that we're already familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for those who may not be, I guess, familiar with Buddhism as a whole, right? The practice of Buddhism and through that the yoga practices, right, that enhance those that spiritual pathway. I've heard it described before as it's more of a philosophy, a framework, than it is an actual religion itself. And so it can have, a Christian can also be a practicing Buddhist with no problems, right? Because it fits in with, I guess, the framework of Buddhism, the framework of everything that's practiced in yoga will also fit in with kind of a Christian worldview, or, a Muslim worldview, or. I'm
going to have to disagree with you on this one.
Okay.
And I'm not speaking for all Buddhists, definitely not. I'm only speaking for myself and the particular path of Buddhism that I practice. And there are many different paths of Buddhism that have different views and different practices. And so the one that I practice, which is a form of Vajrayana taught by Traktung Rinpoche, my teacher, and that was taught, through the same lineage that he holds and that I'm a member of, is, we hold a very particular view. We practice very specific methods. It is a religion.
Okay.
It's not a philosophical tradition, though it does have aspects of that. There may be other Buddhist paths that would describe themselves that way. So this is not like a one size fits all thing, but I can only speak for my own experience. And in my experience, the path that we practice, while congruent with the teachings of Christ, absolutely, would definitely not be congruent with any doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church or probably any other Christian church. So I don't know how that would fit, and there's probably things we do that Jews or Muslims might not appreciate just from certain practices that, violate their religious beliefs. So I don't know that my specific type of Buddhist practice, which is highly specific, I will tell you that, it wouldn't really work unless someone was, like a disciple of the spiritual master. And I don't really know how someone does that while practicing a different religious faith tradition. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. Right. There may be a way, because I am not the spiritual master, so I have no idea. There could possibly be a way to do that, but I don't know. Okay.
Be open and honest with it. I mean, I know just the very basics of Buddhist thought. So no, so thank you for correcting me on that.
Well, you're welcome. And I know that it's a widely kind of held idea that Buddhism is more of a philosophy than a religion, and that there's no God in Buddhism. But I feel like on some level that, once you really examine it in detail and consider the teachings, there absolutely is divinity, right? And there are deities. And what are deities if not heralds of divinity? So to me, it's if it's described as not a religion, to me, that's false advertising.
Okay.
But I'm not trying to accuse you of that. I know that, like I said, it's kind of a widely held idea in the West and probably in the East too.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And to be honest, there's been people I've met, during my travels that, they claim they're 100% Buddhist, but at the same time, they're like, yeah, I'm also Christian. And it's, and for the longest time, I had the question, I'm like, well, how can that be? And that's when, like I said, several of them have expressed that thought that, oh, you can have these differing, you can follow both paths at the same time.
So, they may have had teachers that taught them that. So who am I to argue?
Well, and so returning back to the practice that you describe in your book, as you mentioned, it's a physical, but also a spiritual and intellectual practice.
Yeah, because Tantra tries to weave together like all various different ways of spiritual practice. So you'd have like devotional practice, you'd have yogic practice, you have like more of like the inquiry, which is more of like an intellectual practice. And it combines all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because it basically, Vajrayana says, if something works, let's do it. And if all of these things work, let's do all of them, because we don't have any time to waste. Because Vajrayana is known as like the swift path, because beings are suffering and we better do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to do something about it is to do spiritual practice and then hopefully accomplish the path, and then it would be possible to actually benefit people. Because really what the spiritual path is doing is it's making someone, first it's making someone capable of doing, but then it makes someone capable of doing so much more beyond what's normally thought of as possible that it's outrageous.
So similar to the Western esoteric tradition we spoke about in previously, it is very much an inner transformational process.
Absolutely, and that's the whole point. It's analogous to alchemy, really, because you're changing what you thought you were. And basically, it's not even really that. But what's really happening is it's removing the veils that prevent us from perceiving reality as it is. And that's what it's really doing. So it's much more analogous to alchemy in a sense of like a purification in that sense. And that's why the spiritual methods require discipline and work, because it's like a friction against the way we usually are or want to be. And so it wears it down, right? Just like turning the rough ashlar into the smooth ashlar. So it requires a friction, and that friction rubs against us and is oftentimes uncomfortable and difficult. But that's what actually produces the transformation, the change, or that's what allows us to see through the veils, depending on which analogy I'm using at the moment.
Okay. And the building of the internal spiritual temple.
Absolutely. So that's the work. So that's, laboring in the quarry would be like, in my case, would be like doing deity yoga practice, which is like visualization, mantra repetition, and doing that as much as possible for, hopefully hours at a time if I'm really working at it.
All right. Well, so I know we're coming up on the hour, and I really do appreciate this. Has been a fascinating talk. I do want to ask. So you had mentioned Anathema published Celestial Intelligences. Proneus is where would that be available at?
That's available via Amazon as a paperback and Kindle.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So is there anything that you wanted to, you had mentioned before that you have your website and your podcast. Is there any other announcements that you'd like to give at this time for our listeners?
There's a couple things. One, I'd just like to mention that we're in the midst of a study circle for the book Meditations on the Tarot, if anyone's familiar. It's an excellent book on the tarot symbolism of the major arcana, written by anonymous, we now know as Valentine Tomberg, who is a Christian esotericist. It's a wonderful book. So we're in the midst of our study circle that meets every month to go over that, and it's available to all of our members at chamberofreflection.com. So if anyone's interested in that, I would encourage them to sign up and join us. And the other thing I just want to say is, again, thank you for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. I always am happy and willing to speak to Masons, Masonic groups, lodges, what have you, anytime, because I value my experience in Freemasonry, and I know Freemasonry is a worthwhile endeavor and pursuit for almost everyone, every man that I've known. And I very much appreciate the way that Freemasonry has the capability to actually make us better humans through all of its ways, all of its teachings, all of its lessons and lectures. And so I am eternally grateful for Freemasonry and for Masons that continue to work.
All right, fantastic. Well, we also thank you for joining us on this podcast. I hope that we continue this conversation, well down the road, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. And like I said, I'd love to continue this conversation further. So we're about to have. I'm not sure if this podcast should probably be coming out right before we have a symposium of our own called Texas Masonicon. That's happening on August 20th. So it's something that we try to do every year. These last couple of years have been kind of weird because of COVID, but we're really excited about having our first one post-COVID, if you would, even though it's not quite done with, but we're happy to be able to get together one more time. So again, that's August 20th with a festive board on August 19th. So I'd like to wrap up with a quote of the week. This is something that we do. And this quote is from Nelson Mandela. And it is, "A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. But when you add to that a literate tongue or pen, then you have something very special." Once again, Brother Greg, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. Everyone has a good night. Brother Greg, thank you so much once more. All right. It's been a
Thank you, Brother
fantastic
Billy.
conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Five, four, three, two, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Nice to be in orbit.